I'm Carl Pauls. I'm here with Gabe Ignetti, and this is the Eco-Modernist Channel Live. One of the most contentious issues facing policymakers in their efforts to curb climate change is the debate over whether renewable or nuclear energy should play a larger role and to what extent both are needed. Here to speak with us about this is our special guest, Dr. Elmer Lewis. Welcome to the program. Dr. Lewis is a former chair of Northwestern University's Department of Mechanical Engineering, and he was the Ford Foundation Assistant Professor of Nuclear Engineering at MIT. He's been a consultant to Argonne, Los Alamos, and Oak Ridge National Laboratories. His research and teaching have focused on the physics and safety of nuclear systems and on energy in society. He's written 7 books and over 200 technical publications. Dr. Lewis's latest book is Renewables or Nuclear: Which Should Lead in Curbing Climate Change? Go ahead.
You want me to say something?
I want to say welcome to the program. I hope you're having a great day, and thanks for being with us.
Okay. Could I start out a bit? I've watched some of your recent programs, and there was one that denigrated sodium-cooled reactors, and I realized that some people can't talk about it, but I have no financial interest in the natrium reactor, but I do have a bias toward it because Northwestern is about an hour's drive from Argonne Laboratory, where most of the fast reactor work has gone on in the U.S. And my doctoral students and I have been very much involved in it. In fact, we came up with something called the variational nodal method for computational neutronics, and it's actually being used, we're happy to see, in the design calculations for the natrium reactor. And I think it's a great concept. I think it's going to really change things, and the fact that they're combining the thermal storage with the reactor, so the reactor can run flat out while it's isolated from the turbine generators by the large tanks carrying molten salts, and so that way it's perfect for complementing wind and solar power, because while the reactor runs flat out, the turbines can be going up and down, as I understand it, to almost double the reactor power for as long as 5 hours. So they can complement the jagged curves and troughs and peaks in wind curves, for example, and act as a unit to compensate for them. So, but in addition to that, one of the weak points of earlier sodium-cooled reactors was the heat exchanger between sodium and water, because if there's a leak, then there's a fire. In fact, it was the Super Phoenix reactor was shut down because of such a fire. Well, the new system gets rid of that because the heat exchangers now between sodium and molten salt, which does not react with either water or sodium, so it acts as additional buffers. So that's my sales pitch for the reactor. It's my favorite of the two. So it's
Yeah, and as Dr. Lewis is alluding, I do work with TerraPower, and before I joined the company, I was fortunate enough to interview the project director on that and really interrogate very similar points. I'm really happy with that design, with using essentially the same commercial molten salt blend that's used in concentrated solar systems like Ivanpah solar. And so it's the safety case. I before joining the project, I already knew that the safety case was not really a problem. So thanks for your compliments.
No, they were well deserved. I think that's
And
In fact, I understand as a result of this collaboration between Northwestern and Argonne, there's a code called Variant, if the grapevine tells me that they're trying to combine it with artificial intelligence and using it in these calculations. And so,
sounds amazing.
but it's but at any event, that's not the main theme of the book, which is more sort of focuses mainly on wind and solar energy. Hydro and other things come into play,
Hmm.
but since they're so limited geographical, to the extent that renewables become a large part of the grid, it's probably going to be the wind and solar there. And the book looks at both the challenges of renewables and nuclear. And the nuclear ones are of entirely different nature. They're mainly cost, which I think can be solved because we know with the same designs that the Koreans can build the same reactors that took us so long in the US, and they did it on time and on budget. So and the others are mainly to do with public fears and perceptions, but that's sort of different between the wind and solar because it's the technology itself. I mean, it's wonderful in what they've done with the wind turbines. If you look at the internals of what's there, it's really great engineering, but it's just fundamental that they have the intermediacy, they're dilute, and also stability problems, which maybe the stability problems can be solved, but they're certainly there, as witnessed by the problems they ran into in Spain last spring.
Yeah.
But, uh,
And our coverage of the Iberian blackout was it's not so much that the renewables are intermittent, but they don't provide the rolling reserve in that case. That they are missing this rolling reserve, which of course can be solved technologically speaking. We can solve the problem with a resonant frequency problem, but a rolling reserve with a traditional energy system from large hydro, coal, or nuclear, that tends to absorb it because it's an analog system. So that was our coverage of the Iberian blackout. That not necessarily the intermittency, but just not having that lockstep analog momentum of all the connected generators.
no, absolutely. In fact, they were producing so much solar energy that during the day, they used the excess to recharge their pumped hydro things so that they have a reserve when the morning comes up. So, no, it was the stability of the grid because the real problem is traditionally electric grids, the stabilities, I think what you're calling rolling reserve is I think of the synchronous inertia of the hundreds of tons of steel that are all rotating at 60 or in Spain cases 50 hertz, and you don't have that from sun and wind. And at the time that blackout occurred, they were on like 70% solar.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at the reports. There were four out of their seven reactors were running, but two of them were shut down just for economic reasons because they couldn't. And by the looks of the things, the way they started getting voltage instabilities and cycles of that they didn't have enough rolling reserve or synchronous inertia on the system to counter whatever the disturbances were. So yeah, it wasn't a problem of intermittency, it was the stability problem they were
Yeah.
dealing with. And you don't get any of that when you're using inverters to get AC from the DC that comes off of
Mm-hmm.
wind and solar. So
It
that's
is it possible to build new inverters, maybe higher frequency or better technology in the inverters?
um well, yeah, yes and no. That the higher frequency is, I think, a separate problem. If you look at when they convert DC to AC, it's actually a step function approximation to a sinusoidal curve.
Hmm.
And that means there's high frequency noise in addition to the sinus. And as they get better and go to higher, it pushes the lower end of the high frequency noise up. So that's certainly an improvement, but it doesn't give them any new inertia. There's a lot of work going
Hmm.
on the research angle to try to figure out some sort of uh, there's a more positive term than artificial to use for it. Stability to come to somehow incorporate that into these inverters. So far, the main solution is to use what they call is it synchronous condensers, and basically what these are, and they're very expensive. It's almost like building another plant because they're basically a turbine generator run backwards as a motor, but in an idling mode. So it's not producing any power, but it's got the inertia of the, and in a couple of cases, I think that they either have been or in the process of converting shuttered coal plants, the turbine generators, the turning around and trying to get the stability into the grid by those, but it's certainly not an inexpensive solution.
Yeah, I
So,
want to follow up with sort of generalization before we get to Gabe, but
sure.
the from what I have learned and understand about this, there is some kind of frequency support that we can get from batteries. We saw this in Australia with the Hornsdale Power Reserve, and that's a grid that doesn't generally have a much rolling reserve, many
Hmm.
as many coal plants, and
Hmm.
the cost of that is directly put to the consumer. There was before this Hornsdale battery a frequency control bill and market, and so
Hmm.
that directly led to high energy costs in Australia. As services like these condensers and the higher tech inverters come online, is that going to possibly impact the cost of infrastructure in a way that we don't have priced in at the moment?
Could well be. I'm not that familiar with using the batteries for stability. Is that what? I mean, there's the other problem of the we have active power and, if I'm remembering the terminology, reactive power,
Hmm.
which, as I say in the book, nobody other than electrical engineers working in the utility industry have ever heard of it, probably. But because it does no work, but it's needed because the grids are not capacitive. Because of all the motors and so on. You need to put reactive power in to compensate. The reactive power is measured by the phase lag from the current to the voltage in the thing. And that's another problem. And maybe I think this battery thing may be solved, but normally in the traditional turbine generator, you can dial the turbine to produce the reactive power that you need to compensate for the nature of the loads that you have. But that's another problem is you're putting more and more of that responsibility on fewer and fewer turbine generators as the fraction of renewables on the grid goes up.
Yeah,
So,
good
so
summary. Gabe, go ahead.
Yeah, is all of that worth it as compared to, let's say, just running full nuclear, opening up those plants, adding nuclear plants, and just doing it that way?
well, that would be the nuclear engineer's pure solution, but I'm trying to be more even-handed than that about it, and trying to. I mean, it's a given we're going to have renewables on the grid. It's already baked in with the ones that are there and in the thing. So I think it's a more a question of how you integrate the two, and for future things where you put the emphasis, and that depends on so much. a lot of it being in the way the various ones are subsidized and so on. It's
Great.
yeah.
So, so overall, we're looking at the various problems with, honestly trying to make a primarily renewable powered grid. We're putting a lot of energy in understanding what the faults are, and so does that change our understanding? Does your book go into this? Does it inform us on that question, that central question being, what should the roles of renewables and nuclear be in a future clean energy system?
Well, I think the conclusions you have to come to with it is as the fraction of renewables gets up there to being half or more, the problems become fairly difficult to solve. But the real Achilles heel is something called dark doldrums, which you probably are familiar with. This is when you have they're fairly rare but inevitable periods of days, even a week or more, of overcast skies and calm winds.
Hmm.
Because then what do you do if your grid is half wind and solar? And I don't think there's really a solution on the. I mean, you can say, okay, you build plants to operate then, but the economics doesn't make any sense. However, because if you think about it, the dollars per kilowatt that you have to pay is basically for any carbon free thing that the fuel costs are pretty minuscule. So you can just say it's the capital cost divided by the number of megawatt hours you get from the plant over its whole lifetime gives you what you have to charge for the electricity. And so the load factor is in the denominator of that. In other words, if you only run a plant half of the time, it doubles the cost from what it would be if you were running it full time. And so if you think about it, we've had these. There was one in Germany, but it was back long enough ago that the wind power was pretty minuscule at that point. But there was one in England more recently that lasted several days when they were about half renewables, predominantly wind, a lot of it coming off the North Sea. And they got through it, but only because, well, they had some nuclear plants that were up and running full blast, and they had quite a bit of gas, but they also had coal plants that were shuttered, but they could bring up. And so far, the answer to these longer term things is to bring in the coal. That's what Germany does. But again, even that, if you get where you're not using the coal plants as a substantial, you're not going to just leave them shut them forever. You're going to dismantle them. And then what do you do about these long periods? And I really don't see a solution to that.
Yeah.
Don't dismantle them. Don't dismantle them.
And
Yeah.
who
Yeah,
maintains?
no. Once you dismantle them, you don't have them there to
Yeah.
pick up the reserve when the wind and solar fail you.
Yeah.
It's
Well, as I've learned very quickly, you can't simply have a system on standby without maintenance cost. It is
no.
absolutely,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
It just doesn't make sense to pretend that a system is going to be functioning and expected and reliable when you need it. If you mothball it. Let's say like Watts Bar
Mhm.
2, you would mothball it and
Yeah.
bring it back 20 years later and just expect that everything will work. That's not the case. It takes
Yeah.
millions of
Yeah. It
years.
took a lot to bring it back up.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was. Yeah. Well, it gets me off on maybe another tangent, but I mean, there's overselling of a lot of things. When nuclear reactors, I'm old enough to remember when they first came on the market, people were saying, "Oh, electricity will be too cheap to monitor," and it was a slog. I mean, I've been involved. I did utility consulting back in the 1970s at Edison, and we were when they were bringing the first boiling and pressurized waters on a large scale, and it was a slog. I mean, there was problem with stress corrosion cracking. There was problems with steam generator plugging. There were fuel failures of and so if you looked at the load factors back then, they were up and down in the 30s and 40s and 50s. I mean, now we're up into the 90s because the problems were solvable once you understood them. But they aren't that way in renewables. It's you can't change the weather, to and it tends to be their benefits, to my mind, tend to be oversold because, for example, you keep seeing in the news that renewables, their capacity expanded. It's now they have as many gigawatts as so many nuclear reactors. But what they don't say is that's installed capacity. Usually, if you go into the reports that the stuff is based on, and so, but they have load factors of about a third for a wind and about a quarter for solar. And so, if you build a gigawatts worth of solar, you're only going to get on average 250 megawatts out of it, averaged over a year, and about 300 or 400 megawatts averaged over a year if it's a wind system. But even that conceals the real problem, which is the ups and downs, because and there was some fairly detailed studies of the California system done that are covered in the book, and what happens if you look at the total demand, it's a relatively smooth turn. It peaks in the day, goes down at night, and falls fairly sharply at sundown, which causes other challenges we can talk about. But there, you're left with what's called the residual demand, and that's what we call dispatchable sources, and those are fossil fuels or nuclear or hydro, essentially. And so the residual demand curves goes up and down with sharp valleys too. Well, thermal plants, nuclear or fossil fuel, can't ramp up and down nearly fast enough to keep up with those things. And
How about
trying
battery? How about battery?
batteries will do it. And in fact, they've been very useful because aside from all the other randomness, just the fact that what we found that if you're heavily relying on solar, when the sun sets, the solar goes down much faster than the load does because people are going home and turning on lights and doing all sorts of other stuff at the same time. And thermal plants just can't ramp up fast enough because of the thermal stress problems that you have with those. But and batteries are certainly a good fill-in because basically what they do, they're not anywhere near, and I don't know that they ever will be, of providing enough energy to get you through the night if you're on a solar system, but they can slow down the ramp system. So they buy the precious minutes and maybe half hour or hour so that thermal plants can ramp up and pick up the load. And there have been a couple of cases in California where that didn't happen and they had blackouts at that time of day. There was one in particular that the wind didn't help by dying down at the same time that they were needing it most. But
Yeah.
so yeah, it's an interesting thing, and I think that's probably the most important effect, that when you say yes, we can have 60, 70, 80% solar, it's the other plants just have any thermal plant. And that way, if you've got a good bit of hydropower, that's sort of a lifesaver because they aren't thermal plants. The generators or pumps, not pumps, but generators of hydro plants can ramp up and down very rapidly within minutes. So I think in the Northwest, where you've got a lot
Yeah.
of hydropower, it's less of a problem in some other parts of the country.
It depends. It depends which part, and you talk to your colleague Jim Conca, you'll see that the Pacific Northwest, when we get an influx of renewable energy, it unfortunately doesn't push out fossil fuels. It actually leads us to put our hydro through the chute to bypass the hydro, and
Uh-huh.
so it is, we don't use hydro as dispatchable up here, and it's very confusing why that is, but maybe there's a good reason for it.
Yeah. You, sh- you should have somebody on your program to deal with that.
I could try to get. I think I will try to get Jim Conca on here again. It's
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
that'd
and
be
he can
good.
give us more insight into that. Gabe, you
Yeah,
got a
yeah.
question?
Yeah, what are the economics of all of this? Is that about?
Well, I mean, you look at it, if you're using plants, no matter what kind they are, to compensate for the ups and downs in wind and solar, they're going to have very low load factors. And again, that's in the denominator of capital cost over kilowatt hours per lifetime, because you're not getting as many kilowatt hours of those plants over those lifetimes that you expect to when you do the economics to build them.
So
It's
so does that mean that like, with a gas plant or a coal plant that you try to pretend is dispatchable, as they're not needed until it gets really bad, they just get more expensive? Is batteries? Do you have the same?
yeah. Well, batteries, you have to really divide into short and long duration, because again, we hear all about the number of megawatts that the batteries can put out,
Mm-hmm.
but just as important is the number of megawatt hours. And when they tell you the number of megawatts, because if you double the number of hours, you cut the number of megawatts in half, because it's energy they store, not power.
Mm-hmm.
But so, that's a problem. And basically, running at full power, they discharge in about 4 hours. And that's great if what you're using them for is to slow down the ramp rates that the other plants need to come up, as the sun goes down. But using them 24 hours for that, is kind of a problem, because you're constantly charging and discharging and so on that way. That's
We
but,
Yeah, we saw a really great video this week from Technology Connections and really talked about renewables and batteries and had a really great analogy for it. But he cited the levelized cost of energy plus storage, and saying that
yeah.
was so low that it was amazing and we could build out the whole grid. Does that mean that price is going to stay the same even if the megawatt hours of batteries is 10 times as much as it is today, and the solar is, are we going to get the same value to scale that system to 80%?
No, I think that's it. As you frequently hear, well, yeah, we have intermediates, but we'll take care of it with storage. And if it's battery storage, we can't build enough batteries to last, 12 hours or for through dark doldrums. Storing energy. I mean, the only way we can store enough energy to run through those things is through piles of coal, or tanks full of oil, and so, and a lot of them, and even there are limitations. But I mean, it's generally the long duration massive storage is still, I think it's
Yeah. So
way out there as far as seeing it. I don't see any
yeah.
solution,
So you're looking at
and
giant
yeah,
giant
yeah.
water storage, giant
Yeah,
thermal storage.
there has been some talk about, well, maybe you could have coal mines and a surface lake and have massive pump storage. But on all these things, you have to look about the turnaround efficiency of the things, because with pump storage, even, which is a pretty good method, it's like, I think, around 70%. So
Mhm.
in the economics, you have to, the price difference between when you're pumping up and using it has to overcome that difference before a company can even start making a profit on it.
Yeah, you get 70% of the energy back. Is what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah. Lithium-ion batteries are better. I think they're up in the 90s someplace. But
Mm,
again, I don't think we'll ever have enough of them. I mean, particularly when we need the lithium for car batteries, if we really are serious about, there's going to be a tremendous demand for the lithium, which certainly tends to lift the prices of it, let
exactly.
alone the international implications.
Gabe, did you
But
have a
Yeah.
follow up for that or something else?
Uh, yeah. I don't know if this is far fetched, but what if nuclear was ramped up and the all this renewable is used to turn CO2 into fuel instead of pump storage
I,
and whatever?
I'd have to first ask about what the turnaround efficiency of all this is. Whenever you're doing something, and then like another thing is talked about is from wind and solar is using it to produce hydrogen and then use the hydrogen to run gas turbines, basically. I mean, the difficulty of that is the gas turbine, you're up against the second law of thermodynamics again. Maybe you can get, if you're lucky, 50%, but you've lost 50% by going from a non-thermal so it's much better to use the hydrogen to produce fertilizer or something else to
Yeah,
reduce the
yeah. It don't
demand
have
for
to be. Yeah,
electricity. Yeah.
yeah.
So it's,
It could be any kind of use.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's,
But is that is
that's
that is that feasible? I mean, is that sort of a
which
more elegant solution, maybe?
is the turn. Well, the two things that are talked about is using the hydrogen uh, to produce more electricity, or to use it for well, anything that you go through a thermal plant, you run up against the second law, and it's hard to get even
Yeah.
half of the energy out and the rest. I mean, one of the problems we really have is timing because I live in an all electric apartment condo, which was put up in the 1960s when Commonwealth Edison was building reactors like mad and pushing electricity. But to encourage people to convert heat to electricity now is sort of a mixed bag because if it's an existing place, you can't put heat pumps. If you can use heat pumps, that's great because it cuts down in all sorts of ways. But to replace gas heat with just standard baseboard electric heat, the gas heat with methane is like 90 some percent efficiency. But if you use that methane to produce electricity from a conventional method and then use the electricity, you've lost between half and two-thirds of it as waste heat because you've gone through a thermal cycle when you
Yeah.
didn't need to. You could use the heat directly. I mean,
How about
once you get the electric supply converted, I mean, the power supply converted to electricity, then that's no longer a problem, of course.
well?
That's
How about if you convert it to fuel? Maybe a heating oil or jet fuel. Yeah.
convert it to electricity.
Well, using electricity to produce synthetic fuel,
Yes,
Fuels.
exactly.
is that going to be
Exactly.
like 30 to 60% efficient, depending on the technology?
Um, oh, let's see. Yeah, well, if you're using the fuels to to produce synthetic fuels, that might. I mean, one of the not all the well, not exactly synthetic fuels, but the whole thing of biofuels, if you like, and bioelectricity. To me, that part of renewables is a complete farce.
Hmm.
If you think about it, I looked into it, and in Illinois, at least, about half of the corn crop goes into producing methane And from that, we can get 5% methane to run our cars on. The other 95% is still gasoline.
Mhm.
And if you go through it, the fermentation process you used produces carbon dioxide. So it's not
Hmm.
renewable at all. So what you're doing, but there's now a well-entrenched lobby. I mean, if you
Yeah.
go to Iowa and if you want to be president, you've got to win the Iowa primary. And its economy is heavily based, or the price of corn is on half of the corn crop being used in fermentation to produce synthetic fuel and carbon dioxide. So that and then there's a I don't know if you want to continue on this line, but the whole thing of what you'd use is you grow trees, burn the trees, and oftentimes what's in a converted coal plant to um, to get energy, and therefore it's carbon neutral because the trees will regrow, and as they grow, this photosynthesis takes the carbon dioxide. But if you think about it, you're putting it all into the atmosphere in a couple of months, and you're only regrowing the trees over 20
That's great.
years. So it'll slowly, probably over that span, on average, half of the carbon dioxide is in the thing. Granted, it's steady state. I mean, if you repeat the thing, it won't get any more than that. But if you look at practice, uh, in Europe, I'm not sure it's still the case, but not that many years ago, the largest source of, quote, green energy was biofuels. It wasn't even wind or solar yet. And they were cutting down their forests, and they were actually going to the Eastern Europe, Romania, and places like that. Well, there was an expose in the New York Times where a reporter went out to Romania to see where these fields were, and it didn't look like there was any plans to regrow the trees even. So that, and then worse than that, uh, it became an import market for Europe. So what we're having is we're cutting down trees in the southeast U.S. There are half a dozen or so. Uh, what would you call them? They're not paper mills; they're pellet mills,
Yeah.
where they have to
Mm.
convert cut it down, convert it to pellets, which is pretty energy intensive. All those saws and things, and then you put them into diesel powered ships and ship them to Europe. And so you've created all that carbon dioxide to get something that's carbon neutral. So the whole thing is very negative as far as trying to get carbon dioxide out
So,
of the
so
atmosphere.
pellets are the primary product of these factories. They're not like furniture or
Well,
lumber.
yeah, some of them were furniture and other things, but you quickly outdistance that,
Oh,
So and I guess it's much more efficient money wise to produce the pellets directly than to have to collect the old furniture and do that. So I haven't looked into the economics of that trade-off in particular, but at anything, the whole thing which is billed is being getting carbon dioxide,
hmm,
reducing the amount is not, if anything, it's making the situation so biofuels and bio now, if these plants had um, the other thing we probably need to talk to is about carbon capture and sequestration.
yeah.
If those plants were using that, then possibly they could be neutral and even pulling carbon dioxide and net out of the atmosphere. But I don't think the technology of carbon capture has gotten to the point yet that uh, if you look at the economics of putting it on fossil fuel plants, it does drive up the capital cost
Hmm.
radically.
Yeah.
Maybe not double, but certainly more than several percent that would make it the thing to do.
It
But and then the other thing that I'm really not that negative general. I'm talking about all my pet peeves. So I guess here with some of the renewable, I've got some for nuclear too, I
Right.
think. But the other thing that works out, and I'm having a senior moment now trying to finish my sentence, but I'm 87, so I'm allowed to do that. But at any rate, some of the other things too have some negative consequences to them that really don't get considered when you're talking about the advertising of things. It's yeah,
Yeah. The I want to touch on so this economic decision and thinking about like the products that they produce, like North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, great, classic furniture factories, all furniture outlet stuff. I remember from my youth there, uh, and that's tied to the price of labor. So labor goes
yeah,
up, your furniture margins get smaller, and all of a sudden these pellets that you are selling, the tailings of your manufacturing process is now more profitable. And so it definitely makes sense to me that economics can flip to completely upside down, and we lay off everyone except for the people, loading and unloading trucks. And
yeah,
that's
yeah.
pretty depressing.
No, I mean, certain anything in the energy field has very, I mean, like to go back further, the transfer from coal to oil laid off a lot of coal miners in the process, and
Yeah.
it probably doesn't take as many people to drill for oil as it took to mine coal. So that problem's been around for
Yeah.
a long time, but it's
Gabe has one question, and then I'm going to get us back on track so we can talk about your book.
Yeah, yeah.
oh, we've been talking. You might not have to read it if we go too much further.
Yeah. Um, it would seem that solar panels could play a good role because they're also double as shading, which is, and they'll charge electric vehicles on farms. They could,
Yeah.
and if you electrify your equipment, they could charge your equipment possibly. But does wind really make any sense?
Well, solar makes sense to the degree that how close you are to the equator, because a huge problem with solar is if you look at the ratio of radiance between the summer solstice and the winter solstice, in some place like Minneapolis, it's like zero point 0.2. So that when you really have a lot of need for heating and so on, you're at the point when your solar things
Oh,
are not very efficient at all. So, I mean, if you're near the equator where the days and nights don't change that much during the year, then you have mainly the day to night program rather than the season to season. But now I've forgotten what your question was.
I
Yeah.
mean, solar could double as shading and it could charge vehicles and stuff. But is wind energy really have any rational use? I mean, sometimes I wonder if it's worth it at all.
Does it have a secondary benefit? Like with solar, you
Yeah,
can
Mhm.
you
yeah.
have
Well,
Is it
I guess the
is
thing
it
you can
good?
say with wind is in the book I've got three curves that sort of explain it all. One curve is for winter and summer of a week of a typical winds pattern, and then the second one of a typical solar pattern, and then a third one of demand. With the peaks and valleys of day and night, and I guess the a benefit of wind is, yeah, it's intermittent, but it's a lot more even year round. No matter what your latitude is, or than the solar is, because you aren't directly dependent on the sun. So yeah, and I mean in a lot of places like England, there isn't much solar for obvious reasons at all. It's far enough north, so their main renewable is North Sea wind is a lot of it. So it's and so I of the two, they both have the same problems. Solar doesn't take as many square miles of land space as wind does, because the wind turbines you have to spread out, but they're both dilute, and that becomes a big problem when the percentages get significant. I went down to visit my late wife's sister and her husband, and in central Illinois, it's not like the Great Plains, but the wind is fairly strong there. And they live about 10 miles from a shuttered coal plant. So wind and solar farms are going up all around it. Because, as you know, one of the huge problems with renewables is getting them to the grid where the electricity is used, because so many of them are in remote areas. Well, if you can build them around the shuttered coal plant, it's fine, because you've got high transmission lines, in this case going into Chicago and St. Louis. And so the transmission cost isn't nearly what it would be if you're trying to get there from Kansas or Nebraska. In fact, I have a friend from Oklahoma who was telling me that there was a deal all set up uh, with, I think it was one of the Tennessee, I think it was Memphis, where they were going to sell wind from Oklahoma to Tennessee, but they couldn't get the transmission lines built because Arkansas interfered. And and you can sort of see it. Oklahoma has the advantage of having the source. Tennessee has the advantage, but there's no economic advantage to Arkansas to have a bunch of new transmission lines go through. And so the whole deal, as I understand it, fell through for that reason.
Wow.
So,
That's just another thing to get in the way. So I'm going to step back. And earlier you referred to the old. It was sort of an offhanded remark about nuclear becoming too cheap to meter. And I want to go back to in my lifetime, we have had one thing that really became too cheap to meter. I mean, certainly there's things like water, where you have a really plentiful water area, and maybe at one point water was too cheap to meter, but now everyone's so thirsty and selling it to Nestle, and so universally things like that are being depleted and becoming metered. We're metering out. We're charging per gallon, per kilowatt hour, or per megabyte. Except now we're not. We went in 1993. I was so excited to see that my internet could be unlimited every month instead of charging me per kilobyte or per megabyte. And that is the only thing in my lifetime that has become too cheap to meter is the megabyte. And then I went into when I went into tech, and I figured out, well, the real answer is that it is only the top 15% or the top 5% that sets your charge rate. And so that's really when you're at the commercial level, they figure out how much your total capacity is, and they round you off to your top 15 or top 5%. And that it's amazing to think about that, to where we could get to that with electricity. Is that something that we could do with any renewable technology? Could we get to the point where we have so much that it doesn't make sense to charge? We just like round it off at 85 or 95% and just give them a bill based on that?
well, it sort of interacts with intermediacy because there are times when we're producing, even in the Middle West, where more of it is wind than solar, more of that, and it turns out that with the subsidies, the tax credits for both construction and for destruction with wind, because it has no fuel cost. It's free. It's the wind, and the way the markets are set up, they can actually make money charging the utility less than zero. So, and in fact, I was looking at the Chicago. We've been through a cold snap here, and the price of electricity just goes up and down. And I kid you not, for several hours, I could buy electricity for negative 2 cents a kilowatt hour for several hours. And it's clear that all the wind turbines were really working hard and they were supplying. Now, I'm not sure I don't think they were supplying all of it, but in the net scheme of things, the way the accounting was done
Yeah.
is because we have hourly pricing here as you pay, and the utility then encourage you, and they base it on a normal demand curve of, doing your laundry and everything on weekends or at night. But if you look at these charts, they have no relation to it or the prices, because with renewables, the significant is they become erratic, volatile. They really go up and down. So that, within a few hours, it went from negative to some of the highest prices we have, and then it keeps going up and down depending on whether the wind is blowing or not.
That's
So
kind of like that's like the opposite of too cheap to meter. It's so valuable that sometimes it's negative and sometimes it's $100
and I mean, it's you ought to have somebody in on the whole topic. But when we deregulated the electric markets, and I don't think they did that in the Pacific Northwest, so you can still have vertically integrated utilities in part of it.
Unfortunately, they've all joined the California ISO. So every single
Oh,
one of
they
our
have.
of our
Yeah.
of our municipal owned is Energy Northwest. It's owned by a collection of regional utilities, and then the private utility, Puget Sound Energy, has taken over a lot of utility work here. But all of those are connected to the California ISO and the market, but not the carbon market. So we're paying for spot pricing. And we have a Climate Commitment Act that charges us for carbon, but we're not trading carbon, not yet. So that's, but I'm on a roll, so I want to roll us on to the
Sure.
the next part of this segue that I've started, which is, well, if we can get to too cheap to meter, like the internet became too cheap to meter, within those bounds that I sort of described, like, there are different nuclear options. Is there like one winner? Can all of them scale up to this level of fantastic, plentiful, abundant energy, or is there a winner or even a superior choice, a set of choices?
Well, I think what I do is, in the last chapter of the book, say, okay, what does a future grid that has a lot of renewables on it versus one that doesn't? Which means an awful lot of it is nuclear in that case. And it turns out there have been a lot of system studies done, and they invariably come with, the larger the percentage of nuclears, the higher the price is going to be. In fact, many of those studies didn't even consider nuclear. They argue that you could go to 100% renewables. In fact, there's a fellow, I think Jacobson at Stanford, has been arguing this. But if you look at the studies in detail, which I had to do, what they say is they can get to 100% net renewables. And that means over the course of a year, if you build enough wind turbines and solar panels, you can provide as much or more electricity than you'll need in a year. The problem is you need it at all the wrong times. And so even with those studies, there was a survey of the surveys, if you like, and it said that you usually come up with the wind and solar falling short for about 600 hours a year, when you would need a lot of something else to come up for it. So that I don't see energy being, I think prices are going up, and because suddenly the demand is going up, because for a couple of decades, the price of electricity was pretty flat, but now with between decarbonization and all the centers being put up for AI, it looks like the demand is going to start decreasing a lot, and that'll probably mean increased prices as well.
Gabe,
And so,
you still have your question?
Yeah, I do. You talk about all these fluctuations, especially when you get to negative. Uh, isn't that pretty dangerous in terms of just causing cascading blackouts and stuff like that? Because it seems like
I'm sure it's hard. And in fact, if you look at the literature, uh, we're in the country's largest grid called PJM, which goes from the Mid-Atlantic and Chicago, sort of at the western tip of it. But and they're having lots of grid problems because with the traditional things, you had relatively few inputs to the grids, mainly the power plants. There might be a few dozen, well, over the half of the country, more than that. But the thing of it is, now suddenly you've got many more inputs, and there are these, solar farms that are maybe 100 megawatts instead of having a reactor that's 1,000 megawatts. So you've got 10 inputs for every one, and they're fluctuating on top of that. So it's giving the keeping the grid stable is an increasing problem that they're having to deal with. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
yeah,
But
I was concerned about the just like what happened in Spain. Boom.
yeah, yeah, no, I think there's more danger of that, and they're all lined up with wind and solar farms wanting to be connections that there just aren't substations in the right places or enough of them, and it's one of those other things is when people quote the price of renewables, they don't take into account the need for backup power or transmission because it's how the accounting is done. If you're coming on with a new system and you say you have to consider the integration cost as well, and that can be as large for renewables as the cost of the plant itself. That's
Yeah. Well, we've got maybe five ish to 7-ish minutes left. Dr. Lewis, tell us more about your book and anything else that you'd like to pitch.
Well, we've been talking about a lot of the renewable part.
Yeah.
The nuclear part, I go through in a fair amount of detail, is the main impediment is public concern about um, accidents, storage, and also nuclear weapons. So I have, deal with each of those. Probably the predominant one is accidents, and I think you covered part of that. I know you had a talk on the linear no threshold thing, and a lot of the fear that we have about weapons comes from using that as measuring because, for example, um, even though people were predicting thousands of deaths and so on with the Fukushima accident, and I was on 6 different TV stations trying to counter it in the Chicago area here. But the real problem is with not understanding that the radiation isn't, what the linear no threshold things and a lot of the exaggerated claims of how many thousand deaths there were going to be uh, come out of using that and applying it. And it's exactly what the Health Physics Society says you should not do is applying small amounts of radiation to millions of people and then using the linear hypothesis to show how many cancers there's going to be. Well, it's not right because as we all know, at low levels of radiation, we have background radiation and there's no increase and that varies tremendously. Like it's almost twice as much on the Colorado Plateau than it is in the Gulf states, and yet the cancer rates are higher in the Gulf states. Not that radiation is helping, it's just genetics and diet and exercise and so many other things play into those that. So at any rate, a lot of the
maybe it does help.
misinformation comes from that linear no hot. And if you think about it, with the Chernobyl, with the Fukushima accident, after the fact, using a reasonable threshold rather than the linear no hypothesis, no one there got a dangerous level of radiation. Even if people had sheltered in place rather than all the evacuations, no one would have gotten 100 millisieverts, which is sort of considered the line for, by health physics and other people of where you should start worrying about it. But at the same time, all those evacuations of tens and even hundreds of thousands of people caused, it's now estimated at more than 2,000 deaths, because they were emptying out hospitals and nursing homes, and people were going without their meds and being put up in school gyms and everything. So it sort of tells you that our excessive fear of radiation is actually causing problems because we're doing other things that are creating risk in order to cut down the radiation exposure. So that's, to me, should be one of the main lessons of the Fukushima accident, that fortunately, after 3 Mile Island, they decided not to do any evacuations, which was right, because there was never any significant release of radiation to the atmosphere. But
and yet we still paid for the economic fear of that 3 Mile Island, and that's the only time that disaster fund for the U.S. has paid out, if I remember correctly, is the 3 Mile Island economic compensation.
Yeah, and a lot of the economics is due to the things you do because of the fear, and it's at any event, yeah. So that and we don't have time to go into the waste problem, which I would argue is a political, not a technical thing, because we don't recycle. We could, but until it's cheaper to buy recycled uranium and plutonium than it is to mine new uranium. In a free market economy, people are going to keep buying their uranium from freshly, because we know we can do the French do it, for example, because they have a different outlook in a number of respects that way. But yeah, so I think and then of course the weapons proliferation is another thing, which I think you can summarize by saying that none of the non-signatories of the treaty who've gotten weapons came from power reactors. They were from research reactors or other stuff, which are because to produce weapons grade plutonium, you have to radiate something at very high fluxes for a short period of time. Yeah. And that's not what you do with power reactors when you only refuel them every couple of years. I'd
say in general, there's very, very few outside of India and by proximity, possibly Pakistan. There's no case for a modern, weapons proliferation from nuclear energy. But do you touch on laser enrichment and any proliferation concerns?
Not at all. I mean, well, as the cost of enrichment comes down, certainly that makes a difference. But Pakistan, and I think they sent their stuff to Libya, got their weapon by pirating centrifuge things from Holland and building centrifuges, and that seems to be and clearly that's the main thrust in Iran too, is using centrifuges. So I haven't really followed the laser enrichments, so I don't know where they are on the cost curve, whether it'll get cheaper. I know we're now building I think I saw something of plans to build more centrifuge plants in the U.S. So we still seem to be going that route rather
Yeah.
than the laser route as of now.
Yeah, I'm excited about the laser. There's at least two different technologies that we've interviewed people on, and it is one of those questions of if it becomes or as nuclear and all of its inputs become more economical, does any of that transfer over to weapons proliferation? And can it be isolated from weapons proliferation? So as these technologies are conceived of and created, eventually, places like North Korea would perceivably or conceivably have access to that kind of technology. And so it is not something that we can put back in Pandora's box, knowing
Yeah,
that it is possible. I think that they will eventually get it.
well, this is just a guess on my part, but I would guess uh, that as efficient as centrifuge separation has become, you'd have to get, really, really down the cost curve. And I'm trying to think of what it might
Mm-hmm.
cheaper enrichment would do to the uranium markets. Uh, but if I look at the cost of getting uranium out of the ground and into reactor fuel, um, I'm not sure what the percentage of that is in enriching it from, 0 to 20% or something like that. I don't think it's the lion's share, so it probably would have some economic impact.
Mm-hmm.
But I think how much is still a very much of an open question.
Yeah.
But it's
Well, thank you so
so
much. It's a lot of great things and a lot of things that I would love to dig into, but maybe we'll. I'm starting to participate a little more in the scheduling, so maybe we'll find some time. Again,
yeah.
Dr. Lewis, the book is Renewables or Nuclear, Which Should Lead in Curbing Climate Change. I saw it on Amazon. Is there any other place what's your favorite place to buy books?
Well, at the local bookstore, but that doesn't
There you go.
Well, no, I wind up buying a lot of stuff on, in the Middle West, both Amazon and Barnes and Noble have it on, but the release dates, they keep moving around. My publisher tells me, I guess part of it is it's very international. Springer is based in Switzerland. My acquisition editor's in New York. Production is in India and publicity is in London. So let's figure it out. It's the modern world we live in.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to it, and I hope you have great success in that book release.
Okay, well, thank you.
Whenever
And
it comes
I
out.
appreciate your having me on also.
Yeah.
You ought to have a good program, I think, on closed loop geothermal, because I think that could really be the long-term thing that pays off. I've been reading on it. And in writing the book, I actually upgraded the part that dealt with that to try to bring it up to date because it's changing so fast.
It's really amazing, and we should. I know that I've been watching since Dr. Clack predicted sort of a low nuclear but existing nuclear and large amount of investment in advanced geothermal as a part of his clean grid. Jacobson didn't like that because it had some nuclear, but
well, it's all nuclear. The heat of the central of the Earth is decaying uranium and thorium after all.
Yeah. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for being on the program. Sure. This has been the Eco Modernist Channel Live. You can find us right here on YouTube at Eco Modernist 1, the Eco Modernist Channel. You can also find us on Patreon. Please support us on Patreon at the Eco Modernist Channel. Also, you can find us on Facebook at the Eco Modernist Society of North America and online at ESNA.earth. I'm Carl Alex Pauls. You can find our program rebroadcast on my channels, like my LinkedIn, on my x.com, and on Twitch, which is at Soyaddle or soyaddle.tv on Twitch. And remember, emissions first.